Good morning, good afternoon, and thanks a lot for joining us today. I'm here with, I'm a product marketing manager in Group AB, and I'm here today with Alex Kulkin, our head of digital forensics and malware analysis laboratory.
Hey guys.
So the topic for today is unsurprisingly ransomware, because as Group IB grows in number of customers across the world, in number of threat research centers, we get requests like this, requests like how do we face the ransomware threat and avoid havoc? How do we hunt for the signs of unfolding ransomware attacks? These requests are really common and we get them more and more often. And so, Alec, could you give us a glance back at 2021? How did the threat landscape for ransomware look like? And most importantly, what should we expect in 2022?
So ransomware threat landscape is still at large, and we see quite a lot of incidents of such kind. So if we are talking about our own incident response engagements, then over 60% of all our engagements were related to ransomware attacks. And another important thing that in some cases, it's not only about ransomware deployment, because many threat actors are running dedicated leak sites nowadays, so they may exfiltrate data in order to publish it and use it as a second extortion factor. At the same time, they may just focus on this. So if we are talking about current times, and I think many of you heard about Lepsus, who is just focused on data exfiltration, they do not deploy ransomware at all, just exfiltrate data. And we predicted it back in the day. For example, if you checked our ransomware uncovered report from last year, it was one of the predictions that threat actors it may be very hard for them to deploy ransomware, because many companies nowadays start to implement proper security controls. They may have proper monitoring, at least for a part of their infrastructure, but at the same time, it's much easier for threat actors just to exfiltrate data. So we still see that there are a lot of various ransomware as a service programs. So last year we saw that at least 21 new ransomware as a service programs emerged, but at the same time, if they're talking about ransomware threat landscape in general, there are much more new ransomware families emerge. So it's not known if they are running as a ransomware as a service program, or it's just separate threat actors or groups who use them. And still we see more and more new ransomware families, and many ransomware service programs that are popular, like for example DoppelPaymer, who was rebranded to Grief, and many others that try to rebrand because for example, if they are behind huge attacks like REvil, right, like DarkSide, who rebranded to Black Meta and now to Black Cat. So all these ransomware service programs, they want to not be in kind of sanction list, so they can receive payments from the victim. And of course, they still see that the ransom demand, it grows, and some threat actors ask for astronomical sums. For example, we are talking about Hive ransomware operators. They ask for record-breaking ransom. So it's $240 million. And of course, if we are talking about data exfiltration, then dedicated leak site, they contain a lot of data. And even companies that, for example, refuse to pay and their data got to such DLS, then they got quite a huge amount of companies, of victims. And you can see on the slide that it's 2,371. So if we're talking about key trends in general, so for 2021 and of course for the first part of 2022, again, many threat actors focus on data exfiltration. As I already mentioned, in many cases, it's just almost impossible to deploy. So companies have proper EDRs or monitoring, and it's very difficult to deploy ransomware, but still it's quite possible to exfiltrate. That's why main threat actors focus on data exfiltration and create new dedicated leak site, both on dark web or normal web. So ransomware as a service programs, yes, some of most prolific ransomware service programs closed, like REvil, but still they have a lot of affiliates. And once one program is closed, then they jump to another. And what we see currently, Conti is quite active, less active today, but for example, a week ago, they still were quite active. And for example, Logbit ransomware, who was one of the most active ransomware service programs, they still very, very active today. And just they published new victims on their dedicated leak site just yesterday. So they still very, very active. Again, they attack very different regions. And taking into consideration current situation, nowadays they don't even skip CIS countries, so they attack USA, CIS, APAC, every region. So there are quite a lot of companies. Many companies are still not well protected, so but still can pay ransom, and that's why we still see that there are more and more attacks. Some are performed by well-known threat actors, so ransomware service program affiliates. Others may be performed by not well-known threat actors, but still they are capable to compromise infrastructure and to deploy ransomware, or at least to exfiltrate data. So that's about key trends. And of course, we already in 2022, but we have some predictions for what's going to happen next. Unfortunately, we think that they still see more and more ransomware service programs. Potentially, they won't be that public because currently you can just go to some underground forums and it's quite easy to see that there is a new ransomware service program because they are advertised almost publicly. But taking into consideration current situation, they may be less public because there are quite a lot of threat actors who are around all these, and they already have contacts from one and another, and they then can not just use forums or some public media, they can just do it really underground and try to create their capabilities and decide to move from one ransomware family to another, from one ransomware as a service program to another. So there still will be quite a lot of ransomware service program because it's quite convenient for many threat actors. So nowadays, all they need is just be capable to just perform some pen testing, because still many companies are not protected. And it's very easy. They can get ransomware from third party, they can get a place for exfiltrating the data from the third party. They can even get tooling and manuals from the third party, because last year we saw that some threat actors published materials, so they have their own playbooks. For example, counter-ransomware playbook leaked. Then if we're talking about other guys, for example, another threat actor who was associated with REvil, with Logbit, he also published his own manual. So now it's quite easy to get into all this. You have manuals published in dark web, you can just download it, and it's easy to even low-skilled threat actors to get into this game. So talking about dedicated leak site, they may evolve into real markets. So we believe that less companies will decide to pay to the threat actors, so they still need to monetize what they are doing. And as they may have really juicy data exfiltrated from their targets network, then they can start markets in the dark web and just sell this data to interested party. Unfortunately, what we see now, that the number of attacks is still growing. So they becoming less public, but still, if we are talking about, for example, incident response engagement, what we see during our engagements, what we see during our threat intelligence activities, there are quite a lot of attacks. So because it's the easiest way to monetize the accesses for the threat actors, because for example, it may be very difficult to, if you have access to a bank, it may be very difficult to get money out of it. But if you can deploy ransomware to a bank or to any other company, to some retail companies, it's quite easy to monetize it. So more and more threat actors are very, very interested in all these ransomware business. So that's it.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Oleg. And yeah, interesting. But let's get to the meat of it, the most interesting part we are here today for, the TDPs and the practicalities of threat hunting for such kind of attacks and threats the companies are facing. And first, before we go into the special thing I know you have prepared for us, could you guide us through a brief overview, like what should we know before even approaching a threat hunting activities for ransomware attacks?
Yeah, of course. So the first thing you should understand clearly that all these attacks, despite the fact that really big enterprises may be victims of such attacks, you may get such information from news, you can get such information from various vendors' reports or from dedicated leak sites and all that. In many cases, the attack life cycle is not that difficult, because, as I already mentioned, many threat actors just have some basic penetration testing skills, and in many cases, because many enterprise networks are not well monitored, so they don't have expertise, and even if there are some antivirus software installed, for example, or some more complicated stuff like EDR is installed, it may be just in detection mode, and then something is detected, then nobody responds to such alerts properly. So talking about initial access technique or primary vectors of compromise, there are, in many cases, it's just 3 of them. So of course, one of common vectors is phishing. Many threat actors rely on phishing emails so they can deliver some bots or already covered strike beacons. And as many threat actors, they focus on using living off the land techniques. So they use built-in capabilities of operating system to achieve their goals, or they use absolutely legitimate software for initial access. For example, with Spider, they used Atera or Splashtop, absolutely legitimate software, but still it can be used as remote access tool. So once they have remote access to some host, then they can perform post-exploitation. The same can be said about reconnaissance. I think you're well aware of some techniques and some legitimate tools. So many threat actors used various network scanners like advanced IP scanner, like soft perfect network scanner. This is extremely popular. Almost any ransomware attacks have evidence of using this tool. So that's it. So phishing is still large and still very often used. Again, another thing is exploiting public-facing applications. I think you also know that recently we had a lot of vulnerabilities in such exploitation. For example, Microsoft Exchange, still many threat actors use this to gain initial access to the target network. Of course, many companies, they patched it already, but there is another very, very important thing. So threat actors may compromise these servers, and there may be quite a few web shells already deployed. And in many situations, companies patch the vulnerability, but they don't check if the server was already compromised before. And during taking into consideration this fact, threat actors still have access, and then they decide to perform post-exploitation or sell it because initial access brokers. They are still at large, and still many guys, they just get initial access and they sell it to third-party threat actors for ransomware affiliates, of course, and then they do what they need to do. So again, some general things I already mentioned, some about various tactics, techniques, and procedures, and talking about phishing and about various bots that I used. So almost every bot that's currently active, many groups are using it to gain initial access. So they used to be banking bots, but now they are used just like loaders. So TrickBot, QBot, Dridex, Zloader, all these are currently using ransomware attacks. On the slides you can see some examples. So for example, TrickBot was used to obtain initial access for various ransomware service program affiliates, Farouk, Conti, R-Evil, RansomX. So QuackBot also used by various ransomware service programs like Prolog, Egregor, and others. So it's not the full list. And if we are talking about current threat landscape, we can see even more. And what's more important, as I already mentioned, not only bots can be delivered, but absolutely legitimate software like Atera, for example. It's very common for system administrators, and if companies are using it internally, they may not detect it. So, and that's what threat actors want, and that's what allows them to get initial access and start using similar living of learning technique or legitimate software to perform post-exploitation, and that's why it can be below radars, and that's why they are that successful. So talking about this, it's very important to have capability to hunt for threats, because detections may lose. And of course, if you're talking about malware, about something like Mimikatz, something like Cobalt Strike, in most cases it can be detected. Again, it can be missed because, for example, antivirus software or EDR, if they are in detection mode, and it's very, very common. You may think it's not, but in fact, it's very, very common. And even if such malicious suspicious activity is detected, it doesn't mean that somebody from the company can respond to it properly. And that's the main problem, because tactics, techniques, and procedures in general, they are not super sophisticated. We have investigated a lot of ransomware incidents recently. And in all of them, even if we are talking about really, really big companies, TTPs are not super advanced. They are just general thing that you can see, that you can read about in the reports, but still some of them are undetected, some of them just security guys or system and network administrators, they just didn't take care about it. Okay, they saw that it was detected, then it's okay, but in fact it's not. Okay.
Okay. For those who want to know more, as far as I know, we've published this Ransomware Uncovered report with an interactive heat map and more details on TTPs like the ones you described right now last year. And I'm sure we have the one planned for this year. Could you give us like a brief announcement, or I don't know, a small look into it for the audience here today?
Yeah, sure. So this year we did the same job they did last year. So we collected information from all our incident response engagements, and also we consulted with our threat intelligence and attribution team. So we merged all this data so we can understand how often this or that technique is used, and which groups or which affiliates were using this and that. So we are creating the same report this year. Of course, it's going to be a bit different because threat landscape changed a bit. Tactics, techniques, and procedures changed a bit as well. So this heat map, the new heat map, it's going to be a bit different, but the format will be almost the same. Of course, we prepared some new and interesting things. So So it's going to be a bit different from the report that they did last year, but I hope it still will be very useful. I think we'll publish it next month, so you can have a very good understanding of what happened last year in the ransomware threat landscape, how exactly threat actors got access to the network, moved laterally, dumped credentials and all that, and what you should look for in 2022.
Okay. I want to mention quickly that, of course, we're going to include the links to all the content we discussed here in the follow-up emails. And yeah, let's get to the most interesting part for today, because I know you have something special prepared for us.
Oh, yeah. It's even special for me.
Was basically asked. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, okay. So what we did, we have quite a big team of incident response guys, threat intelligence analysts, and of course, red teamers and penetration testers. So what we did is we asked to emulate a real ransomware attack based on various TTPs observed last year and observed this year. And we are going to investigate it and to try to understand how threat hunting framework, how our own threat hunting framework, and how our own EDR, that's called HuntPoint, can help you in, of course, detection of some techniques and threat hunting. So we haven't checked what guys did. So we only have data from this. So we are going to investigate and to try to understand what exactly threat actors did. So ransomware wasn't deployed, but everything that's happening before ransomware as part of the attack life cycle, it should be there. And we can just check it and try to understand how it can help us.
Okay, let me give you the floor.
Yeah, sure.
Here you go.
Okay. So, can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can. Hope others can.
Okay.
And quick reminder, if you have any questions, by the way, if you want to say something or share something with us, use the chat and the questions on the left on your screen, and we'll get to them later after the presentation.
Yeah. So let's start from our investigation as part of our demo. And then if you have any question, they're more than happy to answer. So, okay. So let's start from alerts. So not from hunting, but from just alerts that are generated absolutely automatically. So in this case, we use detection mode, of course. So our guys can emulate the whole life cycle of the attack before ransomware deployment, as I already mentioned. And so we can show you how you can use the framework for threat hunting and how you can use the framework for investigation. So as I already mentioned, many techniques are very common, and it's absolutely legit for any real-world ransomware attack. You can see here that we have 118 alerts. So first of all, let's just check one or two to understand what information can we get. So for example, just the first one. So we can see that it detected the attempt to use Mimikatz, very common tool for credential dumping. So let's click on it to check. Of course, it's not always used. We see other techniques as well. For example, threat actors may use prodsdump to dump SAS. They may use Lazan. So some other tools also, but still Mimikatz is very common. So here we can see that the threat actors attempted to download it, and even they didn't even they wasn't even successful in downloading. So it was detected. As you can see, it's just in cache of Microsoft Edge browser, and it was immediately detected by the tool. So what else we can see here? So, and also, as you can see, it happened during nighttime, and it happened on 22nd of February. So we still need to understand the time frame of the attack, so we can use it to during our investigation to understand more clear what happened and during which period. So if we scroll down, we can see that on the 21st of February, we also have some alerts. So here is an alert related to Cobalt Strike, and as you know, Cobalt Strike is extremely popular among threat actors, and especially when they're talking about ransomware attacks. So here you can see that Cobalt Strike was used for privilege escalation. It was, of course, detected. Then we can see alerts related to malicious PowerShell. Again, if we are talking about PowerShell, it's a very common thing, may be used as living off the land technique, but at the same time, many frameworks that threat actors use, for example, Cobalt Strike, it allows threat actors to use it to, for example, execute Cobalt Strike beacon stagers or run various commands and run third-party PowerShell script to perform various post-exploitation activities. So all these things are usually very well detected, and I think there is nothing special in it. But still, there are more things. And of course, looking at automatically generated alerts, it's not that interesting, especially when they're talking about threat hunt. But of course, we have more capabilities. So let's switch to another tab. So here we have endpoint events. Let's wait a bit. So we don't have data because here we can see that it's for last 24 hours. And as we already learned from our alerts, that the main stage of the attack took place on 21st of February and 22nd of February. So let's filter it. Okay, so 21st and 22nd. So let's focus on these 2 days. Let's click apply. And now we can see quite a lot of events. So here we can see that there are 3 types. So the first is alerts. It may include even more data than we saw in our alerts pane, that where alerts are automatically generated. It may be merged from various events. And here we can clearly see which event was triggered. So another pane is suspicious events. That is very useful for threat hunting. So suspicious tab means that potentially this event may be suspicious. So you don't need to look through all millions of various types of events that are collected by the hunt point. Instead, you can focus on quite small number. For example, here we have 300 of suspicious events for 2 days, so it's not that much. And you can just even scroll it to check if you see any malicious activity or any dual use or legitimate tools that were used by the threat actors during their post-exploitation. Of course, we'll look through and check what we can find. And the last tab is all. So here we can see all the events that were collected from all the hosts. It doesn't matter if they were malicious, suspicious, or just all the events. So it may be also used for attack reconstruction if you want, or just for some advanced threat hunting. You can see built-in queries or your own queries to use it for threat hunting. So let's start from alerts and then look at suspicious events. So as you can see, we can 619 alerts. So first of all, let's do it 200 per page and go to the last page. I think this should start from the beginning. So to understand how exactly threat actors perform their post-exploitation. Maybe they perform some reconnaissance, maybe they perform some credential dumping, something like that, most likely. Okay, so you already see quite a few very interesting events. So if you listened our first part of the presentation attentively, then you most likely noticed that I mentioned various legitimate tools that can be used by threat actors during post-exploitation. And here we even have red events that are alerts, and we can see multiple events that are related to a defined. So this tool is commonly used by the threat actors to perform Active Directory reconnaissance, so they can understand which account they're interested in, which hosts are available, which users are available, etc. So it has quite common command line arguments. So even if it's renamed, you still can focus on command line arguments. As you can see, Handpoint marks it immediately that this activity most likely isn't legit. So here we can see that the threat actors, they used a batch file, and once it was executed, it's again very, very common thing for Wizard Spider, for REvil, and for many other ransomware as a service program affiliates. They just drop a batch file, execute it, and exfiltrate data so they can recon it on their side. So again, if we click on it, we can learn more about it. So we can see that CMD was run by run-DLL. And again, if they're talking about run-DLL32, is very common. If they're talking about Cobalt Strike, so if we see that the threat actors here that the parent process is run-DLL, especially that is ran from sysval 64, as you can see here, then just remember it. We'll scroll up and try to prove if it's related to some post-exploitation frameworks like Cobalt Strike or not, but this is quite suspicious. And, as you can see that run-DLL runs CMD, and our CMD runs our batch script, and it executes a define. So quite suspicious. Okay, so we can see here a few events related to a defined, so very, very common. So as you can see, we collected data about users, about computers, organizational units, and all that. So again, here we can see a very common command line that's related to Cobalt Strike. Again, we can see that run-DLL is a parent and PowerShell is executed. Absolutely not legit, but again, we'll check it later if it's really Cobalt Strike or not. But again, based on the command line, as you are familiar with it, if you investigated some incidents, for example, some ransomware incidents or some other incidents where Cobalt Strike was used, you already may notice that this command line is very, very, very common for Cobalt Strike. Okay, what else can we see here? So registry key value creation or modification event that's related to firewall rules. So another very suspicious thing that you should focus on. For example, threat actors may want to enable RDP access, because in many networks it's restricted, so they can just jump from one host to another, and they may use batch scripts and, for example, psexec to execute such scripts on remote host and enable RDP and add new firewall rules, so it allows for them to connect via RDP to other hosts. So again, some stuff related to a defined, then we can see Windows handle on process creation events for LSAS XD. So most likely threat actors used Cobalt Strike or some other post-exploitation framework to dump this process, and as you know, it can be used to extract credentials or at least hashes, so it can enable threat actors to move laterally. Again, all these long base64 encoded commands that are very common for Cobalt Strike, Metasploit, and all that. Again, randomly named services names, a good sign of lateral movement. So all this is easily detected, of course, and events like this, that again, a common way to get local system rights, right? So if you are familiar with Cobalt Strike, then all this is quite common. What's more important, in many cases, the threat actors use just very, very default and common techniques to obtain access or to elevate privileges. So, okay, if we have something else that can be interesting for us. So again, Cobalt Strike and related stuff. Nothing super interesting. We already discussed it. Okay. Okay. And one, I think, last thing we'll look at in the alerts pane. We also have suspicious network communication. So let's click and look at this. Okay. So what we have here. So we have this IP address. Let's copy it. And also we have a very suspicious port. So we already theorized that potentially threat actors used Cobalt Strike, right? So we also can see here a very familiar process, this PowerShell, and very familiar command line. We already seen it previously. So how we can understand if it's really Cobalt Strike or not? Of course, based on command line and all that. But also let's check what we can get, what information we can get about this IP address. So we also have graph that collects information regarding various IP addresses and domain names, and it also, in some cases, can attribute it to exact threat actors or to exact tool or framework. So let's use our IP address and just wait a bit and see if it can help us.
Well, we're waiting. Before we go far away from the presentation, we have a few questions in the chat first. It appeared at the very beginning, but I think you partially answered it already. But it's about the detection capabilities. So how does exactly the product detect Cobalt Strike beacons, and does it do it through hashes or some other way? Do you want to go into?
In fact, it's not. So it may detect it absolutely different. So first of all, our threat intelligence team is actively collected information about active Cobalt Strike servers. So it may detect it even via, for example, IP address, because it's known by the server. Next, as Cobalt Strike have quite well-known signatures, it may use signature analysis to detect it, not hashes, of course, because currently, in current situation, in current world, detecting it via hashes, it almost absolutely useless, because even if we are talking about some bots, they have absolutely different hashes all the time, and it's not a very effective way to detect it. What's more, as it also focuses on behavioral characteristics of malware. So if it's dropped to disk, then it can be uploaded to Polygon, our malware detonation platform, and it will be automatically analyzed there. And if it's detected that it's Cobalt Strike beacon or some malware, it depends. Then it immediately added to a threat hunting framework database, and it will be detected and blocked enterprise-wide. Also, Cobalt Strike have quite common characteristics. We already observed some common command lines and all that. So based on this, as hunt point collects various types of events from the host, lots of them. So any of these events can be used as part of detection logic, so it can be really easily detected.
Okay, thank you. And another quick question. Which tools do you use to, if needed, to decode the PowerShell commands that were shown and encoded?
So it depends on. So for example, if we are talking about investigation in general, so you can use tools like CyberChef, for example. But if we are talking about EDR telemetry, if we are talking about working with threat hunting framework and with hunt point data, in most cases you don't even need to decode, because then it's executed. It's followed by new events. So let's say we have base64 encoded payload. Then it's executed, the shellcode is executed, then it communicates with its command and control server, and you can see, like just like here, that there are some network connections. So then you can check this IP address if it's bad or not. Again, the same can be said about base64 encoded commands, and executed. Then you can see CMD or PowerShell execute exact command. For example, threat actors use base64 encoded command to run, let's say, netscan.exe, and you see that there is, after netscan.exe it's executed, or some built-in tools like net or ipconfig or whoami are executed, and all that. So in many cases, then you had good telemetry that is generated by the agent. Then you don't even need to decode, because you see exactly what happened before and after. And you can detect various techniques and various tools on various stages of the attack life cycle. So you don't focus on just one technique, because threat actors, they don't use one small technique. They use a wide range of them. And even if you can detect some of them, but still you can detect others, then you can understand that there is malicious activity on a host, and you can, for example, isolate this host, and our EDR agent allows you to do it. For example, you can isolate host from the network, but still you will be capable of collecting forensic data from the host for in-house forensic analysis if you think that telemetry is not enough for you, or for example, you just installed the agent on the host and you want to get some historic data about this host.
Okay, thanks a lot. Let's get back to the demo for now.
Okay, so we checked various stuff from alerts pane, and now let's also check some stuff from suspicious events, because this also may be a gold mine, especially from threat hunting perspective. So let's wait a bit so it's loaded. Okay, perfect. So let's scroll down and check what we have here. So, and immediately we see a very, very important thing. As I already mentioned, many threat actors focus on data exfiltration. So they collect data from various hosts that, from their perspective, is sensitive. So they collect it and they want to exfiltrate. Usually they use absolutely legitimate tools for it. For example, they can use built-in web browser to exfiltrate it. Of course, it may be not that convenient, and usually web browsers are used to exfiltrate small parts of data. Let's say threat actors obtained initial access by exploiting public-facing application or via RDP, and they dumped LSAS somehow. So they can use web browsers to upload it. Next thing, they may use, of course, various cloud storages. like Mega, like drop me files, and all that. So here we can see that there is events. Of course, they are orange, they're not red, because it may be legit, right? So, for example, users or system administrators, they may use Mega tools, that is command line tools for Mega, to upload some data, for example, backups, for example, I don't know, some data that they need. But still, if we get into suspicious events tab, we can see that there are some very suspicious events. All right, we can see that Mega tools also have quite common command line arguments. So we can see that in our case, threat actors also collected and exfiltrated data, most likely to Mega. Okay, if we scroll more, we can find even more interesting data. So we already understand that threat actors use Cobalt Strike, threat actors use Mega tools for data exfiltration. So maybe there is something else. Okay. So let's check. So we can see also some bash scripts that may be legitimate, maybe not. It depends on the case, but still, as you can see that here we have not that much of events. We can absolutely be very focused, and we can not build queries, but instead we can just use what we have to check it properly and try to understand what happened. So, and one more thing I wanted to show you is that also threat actors want to have redundant access to the network. So it's not enough to have something like bots or Cobalt Strike, because such tools, which are really malicious, they may be very, very easy detected. So threat actors may also use absolutely legitimate tools to have redundant access if other tools and other techniques they use are detected. So here we can see that threat actors also use Blink to build a tunnel and to use it to their C2 and to, or at least one of their C2, to use it to get back to the network if they need, for example, via RDP or something like that. And these events are also not red because potentially Blink may be used by system or network administrators. So it's not a big deal. But at the same time, as we know that ransomware affiliates are commonly use such techniques and tools, then we can use suspicious tab to have an understanding of techniques that potentially malicious. Not 100%, but still you can get a good understanding of what happened and what suspicious events happen, instead of looking through or hunting manually through millions of events. So it may be very, very useful both for friend hunting and for investigation. So that's it. That's what I wanted to show you today as part of this investigation and threat hunting activity. So let's continue and focus on maybe some recommendations that we have. Okay.
While we're switching screens, there's one more quick question for you. What are your thoughts on ETW, event tracing for Windows, as far as I understand? That's all. That is just what are your thoughts? That's the question.
So of course you can have quite a lot of various sources of artifacts. The more you have, the better for you. But it's more about investigation of attack that already happened. You can, if you prefer to use SIM, then of course you can collect various events from various event log sources. But at the same time, it's important to understand what you should focus on. The more events you collect, the more data you have, and the more difficult for you it's to hunt through it and to look through it. So you should have proper understanding of how exactly threat actors work when they are performing their attack inside the network. And if you have proper understanding, you most likely be successful in your hunting or detection exercises, because, as I already mentioned, even if you can detect everything, and you can detect everything, absolutely, no product can detect everything. It's not true. Even if somebody tells you that our products can detect everything, our detection logic is perfect, it can detect everything, it's not true, because there are some techniques that are hard to detect in general, or threat actors may use something, modify some procedures to bypass some defenders and detection opportunities. But at the same time, the attack life cycle is quite long, and threat actors use various techniques and various tools during this attack life cycle, from initial access to actual impact. So you still have a lot of detection opportunities, and even if you detected at least 50 or 60%, you most likely be successful already, because you can see that this host is infected. This host was used as part of lateral movement, and potentially threat actors jump to this host to exfiltrate data, and you can isolate them, clean them, and so the threat actors won't be able to exfiltrate data or deploy ransomware. And this is the main important thing. So of course, it's not always possible to prevent everything, but it's important that you can detect before it's too late.
Thank you. No more questions for now. I have the recommendation slides on the screen. Do you want to comment on any of those, or we can go to more questions from the audience if we have any?
Okay. Let's just look through them. So, 3 main recommendations. So, as we are dealing nowadays with human-operated ransomware attack, it's very important that you have proper monitoring, because if you don't see what's happening in your network, most likely threat actors will be successful today or maybe tomorrow. And it's important that you have good telemetry from all the hosts, from servers, from workstations, and you can perform threat hunting, you can respond properly to alerts, and it's the second recommendation. So if you understand how the attacks work, you can search proactively for any traces of potential post-exploitation techniques, or, for example, legitimate tools, or even of techniques that are commonly used by the threat actors. As I already mentioned, they usually are not that sophisticated. Of course, at some point, let's remember about the attack against Cassia, zero-day exploits, all that. But even if it's an attack against an enterprise network, and even if threat actors have access to zero-day exploits, and they can exploit, for example, public-facing application that they are using, they still need to perform post-exploitation. They need to perform network reconnaissance. They need to get redundant access to your network and all that. So they use more tools and more techniques. And it's important that you can detect at least this. And even if you can see that, okay, I was not prepared for 0 days. Of course, you can't. And they got into this host, but you still detected that they did after they got onto. Then you can be very successful, and you can mitigate this. And the last thing that's very important, as I already mentioned, many security products are in detection-only mode. So they may alert you that something wrong is happening. Cobalt Strike in memory, A-Defined is used, Megatools is used for exfiltration. You just skip it. Okay, antivirus software EDR detected it, so I don't care. It's detected and removed. But in most cases, it's not true, and threat actors may complete their mission even with all these detects. So you should investigate such alerts properly. If you see that something not happening, make sure you collect some data, investigate it, and understand that the antivirus software or your EDR solution really detected and removed it, and there is no threat, no credentials compromised, no VPN accounts compromised, and all that. So that's it. That's it about recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see if we have any more questions from the audience. I see we have at least one.
Sure.
Yeah, let me read through this first. How do I hunt proactively for ransomware attack precursors? What are some examples or cases where you helped organize, detect zero-day exploitation or reconnaissance?
So it's hard to detect zero-day exploitation, but it's really easy to detect zero-day post-exploitation. So let's say if we are talking about even some exchange, right? So first, proxy logo and proxy shell was 0 day, and some APT groups, they started to exploit it before Microsoft released information about this vulnerability. But at the same time, as they use it to deploy a web shell, so first of all, you can see that new files, very suspicious files, are created on the host. Of course, if you don't have proper telemetry, it's quite hard. But at the same time, after most threat actors used the same PowerShell to perform to run some reconnaissance commands, they use it to drop new files like psexec, like prodsdump, to dump SaaS, to run something remotely. So there are a lot of traces of post-exploitation that are really, really easy detectable. So it's not a big deal. And for example, you can download our report from last year, Ransomware Uncovered. It have a lot of examples of post-exploitation. Also, next month, they release a new report. And it's free, by the way. And you can also get a lot of information about command lines used by the threat actors, tools, especially legitimate tools they use. And you can build this, build your detection capabilities based on this. And also, if you want more automated and convenient approach, as I already shown you today, we have our own threat hunting framework. The hunt points, which are collecting proper telemetry, and they already have built-in capability to detect a lot of things, if not all, that ransomware gangs are using. And also, it has built-in queries, and you can create your own queries to hunt proactively for any traces of this.
Okay, great. One more question. Apart from MITRE attack, or can you recommend any other framework for understanding or getting APT information?
From my perspective, MITRE attack is very good. I think it's the best resource to get information about TTPs in general, and what's more important, to try to describe these capabilities, procedures, tactics, and techniques. So at the same time, you should not be very focused on MITRE attack, because some guys, they just, for example, there is a description of a group and they get all TTPs that are described and try to understand if they can detect all of them. It's not a good idea, because, as I mentioned, you should understand the life cycle, so how it works. So, for example, you may not detect it here, but in 5 minutes, when threat actors try to execute something remotely or run some tools to collect information about Active Directory or network in general, you can detect it. So you may skip some steps of the attack life cycle, but make sure that you can detect the key steps of the attack that are common for almost any attack. And that's the main idea. So don't focus much on covering every technique. Focus on covering the most common technique, especially those that are used on early stages of the attack. And all this reconnaissance, post-credential dumping, remote execution. In many cases, all this happens in the very beginning. So threat actors got access to a workstation via phishing email and infecting it with the bots, or they exploited public-facing applications, started post-exploitation, or they brute-forced and public-facing RDP server and started post-exploitation. So it's very, very early stage, and still you can detect it on various levels during post-exploitation. And if you can detect it on most of them, then you'll win for sure.
Okay. I see we've reached an 1 hour mark. We still have one more question.
Okay.
Could you demonstrate how a user would tailor add a custom query and set it to alert the user? So I think demonstrate inside our system, or could you demonstrate how a user would tailor add custom query and set it to alert the user? Do you want to take this one now, or maybe we could connect with the we will write down your question and connect with you personally in the follow-up. And
yeah,
I think that's going to, because we've reached our time limit. So we'll write down your contact details, and then we will get back to you after the webinar and explain this functionality in detail.
Sure.
Personal communication then. Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much, Oleg. I think it was a super productive session, and yeah. Thanks for everybody who was with us today, and see you soon, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you guys. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.